What is the worst form of torture? I read somewhere once of technique where a piece of plastic pipe is inserted into the torturer's anus to widen it. A length of barbed wire is then inserted through this plastic pipe. The pipe is then removed, allowing the anus to close around the barbed wire, which is then pulled out notch by notch. Ultimate forbidden anal beads. The rat torture is honestly one of the most terrifying things I've ever heard about. So they basically starved a couple of rats, put them in a bucket and then tie said bucket on the belly of the person they were about to torture. They would then heat the bucket, which basically meant the rats could only escape by eating through the victim's flesh. I had almost forgotten I knew this, but this subreddit made sure it will haunt me once again. Thanks, op. Torture versus sadistic execution. There's one where they would place people in cages over a patch of bamboo. Certain species of bamboo grow quite quickly. Certain species of bamboo can grow 910 millimeters, 36 in, within a 24-hour period, at a rate of almost 40 millimeters, 1 plus 1/2 in, an hour, a growth around 1 millimeter every 90 seconds, or 1 inch, 2.54 centimeters, every 40 minutes. The idea is that the bamboo will grow through the person because they're pinned in the cage. Reminds me of the opening from one of the Culture series books, where Elon Musk got his drone ship names. A guy is imprisoned in a jail cell, held in chains. Above there's a multi-day feast happening in which high-ranking members of society are meeting as part of the punishment. They eat and drink for days, using toilets that send all their waste down into his jail. Eventually the piss and shit will reach the ceiling and he'll drown in their waste. Was a part of a sleep deprivation experiment in the army. You very quickly lose all grasp on reality. I remember talking to people and in the space of a single blink, they would vanish. We were literally having micro-sleeps while walking. The whole world became a nightmare. Dreamscape. They stopped it eventually when troops were getting seriously injured by just falling over. I have no idea who authorized it. At some caves that I've visited, they tell the story of a dude that got stuck in them. If I remember correctly, building stairs, rails, etc. in said cave system was a part of government work during the Great Depression, and a worker wanted to steal some stuff to sell before they quit, but ended up getting lost in the caves and had to wait there over the weekend in total darkness. Dude swore he was standing up when they found him, laying down. Couldn't imagine what would happen to someone in more time than that. Reminds me of a game of Crusader Kings 2 I played. For people not in the known, you play a noble in medieval Europe and your goal is to bring your dynasty to whatever greatness you deem fit. When your character dies you become your primary heir who inherits your land or part of it, if there is other heirs according to whatever inheritance laws there is. I was playing this Viking whom became obsessed with life and death, a super rare event chain that can result in you become immortal. Part of the event chain is that I am contacted by some person who ostensibly knows how to make me immortal. In this case some warrior lady who were likely a witch. I successfully completed the event chain and became immortal, and so did she, or maybe she already was. The details escaped me. I noticed that she stayed in my court afterwards and kept working for me, and her being a talented warrior I decided she would be a perfect shield maiden. Then she could protect me in battle and rain glorious death upon the enemies of Odin. And protect me she did, striding into battle like a Valkyrie of legend. But being the bodyguard of the Emperor of Scandinavia is risky business, as there is an event that will happen during battle where your shield maiden will save your life but get wounded in the process, typically losing a limb. She kept saving my life, taking hit after hit. Tough. I am not sure if I could actually lose my life being immortal and all, but she kept doing it and I kept rewarding her. And as the centuries of war progressed she slowly lost more and more limbs until she was basically a blind to war, so getting strapped onto a horse or maybe in a little wagon and taken to battle. How she kept saving my life as a torso I don't know. Maybe someone would throw her in front of me. Maybe she got bucked off the horse accidentally, maybe I wore her strapped on my back as some demented armor, but I like to think it looked something like this. That's happened. Here in Anchorage, Alaska, the mudflats are dangerous. They're like quicksand. If you stand still, you could get stuck with no way out. At that point, you would just wait for the tide to come in and drown you, since you only sank to a certain point. I heard this story. Some group of friends went onto the mudflats, once got stuck and the others just laughed. Eventually they went to pull him out, but he was too far and he died, and if the friends helped him immediately, he could have lived. Scaphism. Basically, they encapsulate you between two boats with only your hands, feet, and head sticking out. Then they float you in a swamp and force feed you a mix of milk and honey over the next few days. For starters, the sweet mess on your face attracts flies and mosquitoes, so your face is crawling with them the entire time. Next, the laxative diet means you shit yourself a lot, which attracts more insects and parasites that breed like mad inside the boats. And worse, inside you. Your body will be a painful, itchy, bug-infested septic corpse for days before you die. Looked it up since I couldn't understand the phrase encapsulate you between two boats and found this relevant info. Wikipedia. The practice is considered to be a purely literary invention of the ancient Greek literature, as it has never been attested in ancient Persia, primarily Achaemenid Empire. The primary source is Plutarch's Life of Artaxerxes, where he attributes the story to Ctesias, a notoriously suspect source. 234. Tying someone naked to a chair and then nailing their balls to it. I read it in a book, and in it the people had a virus that gave them regeneration abilities, so the ball healed up and the torturer proceeded to do it over and over again, as it wouldn't kill him and his nerves would heal perfectly so the pain would never dull. It was a good book series, and this is probably the worst torture I can think of, even just happening twice at most. You best believe I'm spilling all my secrets to save my balls. Lynching, otherwise known as death by 1,000 cuts, was a form of torture used by the Chinese until 1905. Basically what they would do was take knives and start whittling away at your body with sharp knives, taking it slow and starting with the least vital parts and working their way up, making sure that your death is long and agonizing. I have heard that it is the most painful thing anyone has had to endure in the history of mankind. Crucifixion, no doubt. Forced to stand up for days at a time nailed to a cross. You're so tired that you collapse, but then you start to hang and die from asphyxiation, until your survival instincts kick in and you end up standing up, only to go restart this horrible cycle until either one kills you. Romans found a way to kill people over the space of days by turning their own will to live against them. Didn't even need a torturer, just a cross and some nails. The execution of Balthasar Gerard. At his trial, Gerard was sentenced to be tortured and then executed, in a manner considered brutal by the standards at the time. The magistrates decreed that the right hand of Gerard should be burned off with a red-hot iron, that his flesh should be torn from his bones with pincers in 6 different places, that he should be quartered and disemboweled alive, his heart torn from his bosom and flung in his face, and that, finally, his head should be taken off. 1. Gerard's torture was extraordinarily brutal. On the first night of his imprisonment, Gerard was hung on a pole and lashed with a whip. Next, his wounds were smeared with honey and a goat was brought to lick the honey off his skin with its rough tongue. The goat, however, refused to touch his body. After several other forms of torture, he was left to pass the night with his hands and feet bound together, like a ball, so sleep would be difficult. During the following 3 days, he was repeatedly mocked and hung on a pole with his hands tied behind his back. Then, a weight of 300 metric pounds, 150 kilograms, was attached to each of his big toes for half an hour. Subsequently, Gerard was fitted with shoes made of well-oiled, uncured dog skin. The shoes were 2 fingers shorter than his feet. In this state, he was put before a fire. When the shoes warmed up, they contracted, crushing the feet inside them to stumps. When the shoes were removed, his half-broiled skin was torn off. After his feet were damaged, his armpits were branded. He was then dressed in a shirt soaked in alcohol. Lastly, burning bacon fat was poured over him and sharp nails were stuck between the flesh and the nails of his hands and feet. On the 14th of July, 4 days after the assassination, The sentence declared at the trial was carried out and Gerard was tortured and executed in the market square of Delft. His severed head was then displayed on a pike behind the Prinsenhof. 5. And his arms and legs displayed on 4 gates of the city. 6. Alzheimer's is very sad and painful to families. I had a close friend who had a grandpa with that, and whenever he has attacks, either he climbs up their fence and the rest of the family spends days looking for him, or my friend or his grandma gets beat up by his grandpa. There was even a time when he invited us friends in their house and we kinda witnessed an episode. It was too painful to watch, seeing a husband attacking his wife without knowing what he is doing, and the wife could not do anything but try to stop him. We would have helped, but my friends and tried to prevent us from going out the room as to not cause more aggression. If it's true, but the CIA experimented with this liquid called perfluorohexane. It's a liquid that is capable of letting you breathe because of how well spread the oxygen and carbon molecules are. The experiment was when they needed a prisoner to talk, they'd take them into his tank full of it, and it would be pitch black. Logical reaction to being submerged into a liquid is to start holding your breath. The prisoner would pass out, then reawaken, breathing normally, but still in this liquid. It was meant to mentally and psychologically mess with them. Again, if this is true or not. However, if it were, pretty messed up torture technique. I feel that my brother had it preset in his head he will die in his 30s. I tried to convince him there's more to live for. We both lived to party every weekend, but he would always take it a bit far and always ended up in a cop car. Last year he took his life by hanging himself. He was only 33. I still have rough days when I see something that reminds me of him or hear his songs, but what kills me the most is seeing his kids, my nephews and niece. One son in particular looks like a clone of my brother. Well, the Chinese had some pretty bad ones as well as the Vietnamese. Death by 1,000 cuts was where they would make cuts all over your body slowly over time, allowing them to get infected. The VC would grow bamboo through a person's body. Bamboo grows extremely fast, so it was excruciating to live through a tree growing through your body. The Germans worked people to death. There is always being skinned alive. Dahmer did stuff like that. Buried alive is psychologically horrible. Sex slaves are brutally raped constantly. But in my mind the worst is the African warlords tribes that genocide other peoples. They like to cut off the breasts of nursing mothers so they cannot feed their children. That seems the most horrible to me. The brutal, prolonged torture inflicted by the Japanese on POWs in WW2. On January 26, 1945, Job Haberfield, a Hellcat pilot on HMS Indomitable, was shot down during an attack on the oil refineries in Palembang, Sumatra. He was captured by the Japanese and handed over to the Kempeitai, the Japanese Gestapo, who didn't regard pilots as POWs but as war criminals. Haberfield was denied food and water during his interrogation, and was beaten and placed on public display for humiliation and to be photographed. He was eventually sent to the notorious Outram Road jail in Singapore, where his condition deteriorated due to his wounds and lack of food. In all, there were 9 Fleet Air Arm pilots in the jail, and if they'd hoped to be released to a POW camp where chances of survival were marginally better, they were sadly mistaken. For the remainder of their lives the prisoners were held in solitary confinement, 6 months of slow starvation and regular beatings. During July and August 1945 the ill treatment intensified and they were used as bargaining chips, threatened with slaughter if the Allies set foot on Japanese soil. Following surrender on 15 August, the Japanese High Command sent word that any prisoners treated unkindly who lived to bear witness to this cruelty should be eliminated. So, without trial and without mercy, Haberfield and the other 8 prisoners were taken down to the beach and beheaded. Major Kataki was responsible for their deaths. He had this to say about it: after interrogating them, I was not able to decide whether to put them in a POW camp here or send them to the Japanese main island. I could not help despising them for what they were. Under such circumstances I decided to personally execute the 9 men. After office hours I drove a lorry myself and went to the Gulf with the above mentioned. We took out the 9 prisoners, brought them to the beach at the northern end of the Shanghai area, and executed them with swords on the beach. The bodies were then put in a boat prepared beforehand, and sunk in the sea with weights attached to them. It is impossible to imagine the thoughts of these young men as they waited such cold-blooded executions, starved and brutalized over many months, kept in solitary confinement without contact and support. They must have lost all hope and been in despair. Even the means of the death was chosen to terrorize and torture, decapitated one by one, the sound and smell invading their consciousness. No escape and no compassion. When allied intelligence officers belatedly arrived to investigate rumors of atrocities at the gaol, Major Kataki told them the airman had been sent to the mainland. He then fled and escaped the justice he deserved. His commanding officer, however, was captured and put on trial for his part in the torture and execution, but committed suicide before the trial. Got in an ATV accident where my chin was cut open, to the bone, around 5 inches across my face. Rushed to hospital. They have to numb the area. This process involves a large needle very slowly being scraped across the exposed bone. Since this is what is done to cause the numbness, I felt everything. This is the worst torture I could ever imagine for someone. An exposed bone in your face that you can hear and feel. BC exposed nerve ending around ripped skin, being scraped. Imagine a black chalkboard and long fingernails, but inside your face. It was unlike any pain I've ever experienced in my life, and to this day I have an irrational fear of needles. Sight or sound, I get chills. When I was 13, about 10 years ago, I had a staph infection I needed drained because my parents didn't listen to me when I said I needed to go to the doctor. My pediatrician had to numb the area. The needle hurt. However, I wasn't numbed at all, and to this day, having a scalpel be taken across my skin and into my muscle is sheer pain. I have gallstones and those don't hurt as bad as having that scalpel cut me. And having my arm dig around in. My infection was under my arm, around my armpit. I felt all of that. I felt her pack the wound, and get stuff to test for MRSA, the burning pain. I cried. To this day I can't stand needles. Agreeing to go on a date with a guy. After learning he has no other friends or family, get him shit-faced for the first time in his life and take his virginity even though it's not yours to take. Treat him well. Give him compliments, then slowly start to psychologically and emotionally abuse him. He has no one to tell about this. Cancelled his birthday 45 minutes before coming over, knowing that'll hurt him, forcing him to spend his birthday alone. Cancel Christmas, hurting him again. Cancel Valentine's Day, again. Cancel his late dad's birthday, one more time. Stand him up when he's having a great day and ghost him for a week and then tell him you had a mental breakdown. Deflect questions. Lie. Lie to him about yourself and your friends. Lie to your friends about him. Gaslight him. Once you've shattered his spirits, end the friendship by charging him with harassment so that he can't charge you for raping him. Give 2 people an STD and tell him it's his fault. Even though you haven't had sex in 5 months and you've had sex with several people since then. Edit. Thanks for all your concerns, but I'm doing better. I've made a few friends recently, and I talk to them for support. Watching someone in the public eye or on social media struggle with mental health issues, constantly deny it and start to frequently spiral live on air, to the point where their whole feed becomes an archive of paranoid rants and videos of their mental breakdowns. Essentially, it's the feeling of helplessness when someone appears so close, due to the nature of the platform, but they're still out of reach where you can't actively get through to them no matter how much you'd like to help. Instead, you only witness them getting worse until one day you read a newspaper headline that makes your throat close up and your eyes wet and blurry because you truly hoped what your gut feeling was telling you months ago, about what was going to happen, was wrong. A sensory deprivation chamber built inside an anechoic chamber. All of your 5 senses completely muted. You don't torture someone with pain. After long enough the pain becomes part of the daily routine. You torture someone by taking away all the familiar things. I can think of no experience that would achieve this result, and be the most alien feeling experience of your life. And before anyone asks, yes, I'm okay. No, I'm not a sociopath or a psychopath. I just find human psychology interesting. being trapped in a biochemical illusion. It's literally being tortured by nothing but an imbalance in your brain coloring all the external stimulus around you. You can't see the world for the world pulled over your eyes and make choices based on incorrect data over and over and over, and there is no way out of the loop. Even self-awareness can't save you or medication. It makes you aware. It subdues the static and lies. But you never are free from questioning if every feeling is real, if bad people are bad, if your gut is right, if good people are actually good, and if your fear, paranoia, excitement, or even passion is just a biochemical imbalance in your brain. That's torture.